In times of a crisis like this, many of them dream about some strong, powerful leader and just trust in one big leader. That's extremely dangerous. First of all, because once you have such a big leader, they will not leave once the crisis is over. They will always find an excuse to hang on to power. You know, humankind, for the first time in history actually, we have everything we need to overcome this epidemic. During the Black Death, people were dying in their millions all around you, and nobody had any idea why people were dying and what could be done about it. People thought it was punishment from God or something beyond their power to change. Today, in contrast, we understand perfectly what is happening. It took just 2 weeks to identify the virus responsible for the disease. In Israel, they closed down the synagogues. In Iran, they closed down the mosques. The churches all over the world are telling people, don't come to church, don't come to the temple. Why? Because the scientists said so. In this time of crisis, they turn to science, and I hope people will remember this, and that as a result of this crisis, we will see better scientific education and more trust in scientific authority, not just about epidemics, but also about other things like climate change. We see the nature of surveillance changing from over-the-skin surveillance to under-the-skin surveillance. Over-the-skin surveillance is, say, the government or a corporation watching, monitoring where you go, what you buy, what you watch on television. Under the skin surveillance starts with monitoring your body temperature and blood pressure, but ultimately it's about hacking your body and brain. Just imagine that we have this kind of biometric surveillance, like everybody is wearing bracelets, which constantly measure your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your body temperature. That can tell not just if you have coronavirus, it can also tell them how you feel. So just imagine a place like North Korea. They are monitoring your body. You can force yourself to smile and you can clap your hands, but if you're angry about the big leader, they'll know it. But it could happen in a few years if we are not careful. The problem with emergency measures, they tend to stay forever. Because there is always a new emergency. Even when coronavirus is down to 0, they will say, wait, but there is a second wave coming, so we have to be prepared. People should realize they shouldn't have to choose between privacy and health. They should have both. In order to get good medical care, I give the doctor a lot of private information, and I trust my doctor to keep this information private and just use it to take care of me without telling it to my boss or to the government. Yes, we need a new system of monitoring people with disease to stop epidemic, but it should be a separate healthcare authority, completely separate from the police, from the army. It's not their business. And secondly, surveillance must always go both ways. It's not just the government monitoring the people should monitor the government. This is a democracy. In a dictatorship, you don't know what the government is doing. For instance, right now, governments all over the world are handing out money like water. Now, as a citizen, I want to know who is making the decisions and where the money goes. Do they use it to save big corporations whose owners are friends with the politicians? Or do they use the money to save the small businesses of ordinary people. Okay, you monitor my health, that's important. At the same time, I monitor what you do with the money. Then this is democratic. In times of a crisis like this, when people are afraid for their own lives, they are losing their jobs, their livelihood, many of them dream about some strong, powerful leader that knows everything and will protect us and just trust in one big leader. That's extremely dangerous. First of all, because once you have such a big leader, they will not leave once the crisis is over. They will always find an excuse to hang on to power. There is always a new emergency coming. Once you give up your freedom, it's very difficult to take it back. You know, we have all these strong men just using the emergency, the epidemic as an excuse to gain power, and we shouldn't believe them. We shouldn't fall into this trap. Dictatorships are just not more efficient than democracies in an emergency like this. People imagine that dictatorships are better because they can make decisions faster. But the problem is that if this one man took a wrong decision, made a mistake, usually he will never admit it. He will just blame others. I made the right decision, but there are traitors and enemies, and because of this, the crisis is only getting worse. So I need even more power. Give me even more power to deal with these traitors and enemies. In a democracy, in contrast, when a government makes the wrong decision, it is more willing to admit a mistake and try something else because there are different voices, there are more interests involved in making the decision. And you see the world today. So yes, China, which is an authoritarian regime, dealt with the situation relatively effectively, but so did South Korea and Taiwan and New Zealand. These countries actually dealt with the crisis better than China without becoming dictatorships. It's a huge, huge problem. Our biggest advantage over the virus is that we can cooperate in ways the virus can't. A virus in China cannot give advice to a virus in the United States. The Italian viruses cannot ask for help from the Spanish viruses. Humans can do that. China can give advice to the United States. One country can send medical equipment to another country. But if we don't make use of this human ability, then our ability to deal with the crisis is much diminished, because to deal with epidemic, you can't deal with an epidemic just by closing your borders and stopping all flights. The real antidote to epidemics is not isolation, it's cooperation. When you get information in time between different countries, this is how you stop epidemics in the most easy way. To deal with the economic crisis, it's even more important to have cooperation. The US can have a rescue package of $2 trillion, but many countries around the world, from Brazil to India, they don't have these kinds of resources. So unless we have a global economic plan, we might face a global depression. Entire countries could collapse, and this could, of course, destabilize the rest of the world. I'm not so afraid of the virus. I'm much more afraid of the inner demons of humanity coming out, people reacting to this crisis not with solidarity, but with hatred or with greed. That's the biggest danger we face.